Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format and is in public. For those in person, please follow the health and safety guidelines on the cards found on your table to prevent audio or feedback incidents. À la fin de la réunion, je vais inviter aux membres de donner des instructions aux analystes pour leur rédaction d'un projet de rapport pour l'étude de la norme sur la disponibilité des véhicules électriques. Donc, aujourd'hui, on a from Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, Mr. Andrew DeFazio. Welcome. Director, Risk Management, Strategy and Products. From the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Trevor Bushing. Assistant Deputy Minister, Emergency Management and Programs Branch, and Mrs. Kenza L. Bied, Director General, Policy and Outreach, Emergency Management Branch. Dear guests, when I put this up, it indicates you have 1 minute left to complete your sentence or your thought, and once I turn it over, I would like you to kindly cease from talking, and you each have 5 minutes to do opening statements, and I will start with Mr.
Excusez, Monsieur le Président. Pas de traduction, je pense.
No translation. With Mr. Andrew DeFazio for 5 minutes. We're testing. Est-ce que la traduction en français fonctionne?
Does the French interpretation work?
En français, ça fonctionne bien.
Into French, it is working well.
Est-ce que la traduction en anglais,
Is the interpretation into English working? Is that working?
You understand very well what I'm saying? What did I say?
You can understand what the chairman is saying?
In French. You told me you're taking French courses, so I'm helping you out here. Donc, tout va bien, Monsieur Bonnet? Mr. Bonnet, est-ce que
Mr. Bonnet,
can you hear me well?
Can you hear me well?
Thank you. So, Mr. DeFazio, after this little chip, we'll let you have the floor for 5 full minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Je vais commencer mes commentaires en français and I'll conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll begin in French and I'll conclude in English. For 80 years, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation has helped Canadians access housing in the good times and bad. We do this by providing financing solutions, delivering housing programs, and offering trusted housing research and insights. And we do all of this in partnership with more than 10,000 clients across the housing sector. As this committee knows, climate change is increasing both the frequency and severity of extreme weather events across Canada. Mitigation and adaptation are essential. CMHC supports these goals by offering financing solutions that incentivize climate-compatible design in new housing constructions. For example, nearly 50% of the housing units we backed in 2024 were climate compatible. We also delivered the successful Canada Greener Homes Loan Program. This offered interest-free financing directly to Canadian families to make their homes more energy efficient.
As part of ongoing analysis, we have found that homes in flood risk areas tend to see slower price growth than homes outside these areas. We are continuing to study this pattern to better understand why. At the same time, CMHC is technical advisor to public safety for the work on the National Flood Insurance Program. The intent is to protect high-risk households that cannot currently access insurance and help ensure that homes damaged by extreme weather events can be repaired and remain part of our housing stock, especially now when Canada has a severe housing shortage. When it comes to flooding, some residential homes in low and medium risk flood areas do have access to flood insurance, but those in high risk areas don't. And where they do have access, the insurance coverage either isn't adequate to cover losses or it's simply not affordable. About 10% of households are uninsurable or severely underinsured, yet account for 90% of total flood risk, potentially representing modeled losses of about $1.5 billion per year. When floods happen, families in these homes often have to rely on personal savings, debt, charities, and/or government assistance programs, such as the disaster financial assistance arrangements. As technical advisor to public safety, CMHC has helped engage with provinces and territories and with partners across the property insurance industry. The insurers have expressed strong support for a national flood insurance program, one that's industry delivered and government backed. They also told us the program should be designed so that it is scalable to other extreme weather events and natural catastrophes over time, and that the risks can be transitioned back to industry over time. Canada is the only G7 country without a public mechanism for managing natural catastrophes. There are lessons we can learn from other countries. Given our federation with roles at all three levels of government, we need a Made in Canada model. CMHC continues to support public safety with technical advice as needed to prepare options for the program. Whatever option is chosen, CMHC is committed to helping to stand it up. In the context of the country's current housing and affordability crisis, Canadians cannot endure financial strain to climate events and cannot afford to lose their homes. Ensuring that Canadians have access to affordable and adequate insurance and that communities are resilient will help reduce climate-related hardship and will help maintain a strong housing system for all. Merci, Monsieur le Président. I'd be happy to answer questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. DeFazio. Any comments? One, perfect. So we will forward to you, Mrs. Anstey, for six.
No, there's a second.
Oh, sorry. There is a second witness that will be speaking. Sorry about that. Mrs. Elby, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for inviting me today. So, as you are all aware, extreme weather brought on by climate change is increasing in frequency and severity, costing households and insurers more. Canada faces elevated disaster risk from wildfires, floods, and other extreme weather, with mounting losses to homes, businesses, and natural areas. We can no longer take a reactive or ad hoc approach to disasters. We need to evolve our approach to emergency management to meet challenges before us. Il est clair qu'un changement s'impose pour que le Canada puisse mieux se préparer.
A change is necessary so that Canada can better prepare for natural disasters, to mitigate these and to recover from them, thanks to a more proactive and cross-Canada approach. This is key to develop resilience of communities and improve the state of preparation and coordination of emergency measures in an environment where natural disasters are occurring more often.
Coastalized natural hazard and flood damages continue to increase as a result of climate change, demographic shifts, and development in high-risk areas. As such, Public Safety Canada is advancing several initiatives to increase resilience across Canada, including to strengthen our ability to prevent, reduce, recover, and adapt to flood risks. The Modernized Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangement Program, launched April 1, 2025, incorporates resilience measures into restructures to recovery funding, lowers future risk instead of recreating it. Building back better has become the standard to avoid repeated losses for places such as the Fraser Valley. The
updated programs increases the funds available to mitigate strategically with federal financial participation, which is higher when investments in mitigation protect high-risk zones and/or future losses, and these are the most likely to occur.
Work towards standing up a national flood insurance program is progressing. That said, it is important to understand the context for overland flooding in Canada. Prior to 2015, Canada did not have overland flood insurance market. Since then, the market has evolved significantly, and we recognize the progress the insurance industry has made. At the same time, provinces, territories, and municipalities have indicated that coverage is becoming more expensive and often does not fully meet recovery needs. More importantly, the remaining protection gap is concentrated where it matters most. Private overland flood insurance is largely available in low to medium risk areas, presenting roughly 10% of overall flood risk. Meanwhile, about 90% of flood risk is concentrated in high-risk areas where potentially up to 1 million Canadian households remain unable to obtain adequate coverage. Du point de vue de Sécurité publique Canada, cela
From the
signifie
viewpoint of
qu'il faut
Public Safety
redoubler
Canada, this means that we need to put more effort into substantially making up for the lack of protection for those most vulnerable, especially that natural disasters are more frequent and more severe.
Standing up a national flood insurance program will require a coordinated effort across all levels of government, the insurance industry, and Canadian households. Indeed, the insurance industry, provinces, and territories are key partners in this work, and they have played important roles in the industry and provincial territorial task forces working on flood insurance in Canada. Cette collaboration s'est poursuivie.
This collaboration continues, specifically thanks to recent discussion with Public Safety Canada and our technical partners at the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. Public Safety Canada has committed to drafting a program that Canadians can benefit from substantially, all the while completely taking into account the interests, the expertise, and operational realities of the insurance sector, as well as the general context of these other sectors.
Feel safe, and that our communities are resilient in the face of all hazards, including extreme weather events.
Thank you, Mrs. Elbide. Mrs. Estee, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you to the hearing today. Is my microphone on? Okay, great. Our representative or witness from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Association, you talked a little bit about the mitigation and financing for climate-compatible properties. And I just wanted to dig into that a little bit deeper. So when you're doing your research with respect to these programs, is there an understanding of what the increased cost of construction is for some of these recommendations?
I don't have any information on what the increased costs would be. I would say that in terms of having a successful insurance program, we'd want to see mitigation at the household level, mitigation in terms of infrastructure, and then that would help allow for a greater chance for a successful insurance company. But I don't have any exact costs on what that would look like.
It's interesting. I've been in this industry for many years, but I also spoke with the Canadian Builders Association on similar sort of issues with relation to affordability. And I think one of the concerns is that we could certainly make recommendations around resilience, but I think affordability needs to be a part of the conversation. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I definitely think affordability needs to be worked into the discussion. I think affordability can be looked at short-term versus long-term. And when you look at it long-term, making some of those investments for climate mitigation could, over the long term, make the construction more affordable as not having to rebuild, having to renovate so that the buildings can withstand climate events.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part of the conversation, especially given the moment in time that we're in right now, when we know Canadians are really pressed in terms of affording properties. And so I think there's certainly, I think it would be important that the affordability piece would come into that conversation. Just curious if you would agree with that.
I would say affordability, of course, is a key tenet of CMHC and looking at housing in general, but then also to find ways to introduce technologies to help mitigate against climate events, to make those more mainstream with the hope that eventually they become more affordable. So I would agree affordability is a key tenet.
Yeah. I come from a part of the country in Newfoundland and Labrador where construction is sometimes a little different than the conventional in some of the larger centers. And when you look at these measures, I'm just curious, do you look at the ability for people to access, whether it's a specific type of building material or a specific sort of method that would be used on these mitigation measures to make sure that rural parts of the country are included and it can be effective in all parts of the country, as opposed to just larger centers that may have more access?
Well, I'd just like to specify in terms of my expertise, it's around the insurance product or the reinsurance product, not necessarily bringing in the mitigation pieces into what that would do for construction. In terms of thinking about how that could play out, possibly public safety in terms of policy or program decisions may be able to provide a little bit more insight.
Okay. I'm also curious, when it comes to the insurance piece, if people live in these high-risk areas, would there be a view to say that a numerous amount of insurance claims, if they live in high-risk areas, would there be a backstop in terms of how many times they could access public type of insurance if they're living in areas that seem to be typically high risk?
Again, I refer that to public safety around a policy decision of what the government would want the reinsurance parameters to be.
Okay. Also, when it comes to coastal areas, one of the things that I often get asked, and I think there's certainly some conversation around in terms of where I live, is relocation. Does this ever factor into some of the conversations that you're having as you're studying this?
And to clarify, our role as the technical advisor, we would work with public safety around policy parameters that they would want for the program and give our advice in terms of operationalizing them. So I would say that would be a question better suited to public safety.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Miedema, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'm really excited about this study. My riding is Halifax, and we've had a lot of extreme weather events in Halifax over the last number of recent years. In 2023, we had a wildfire, a flash flood, and a hurricane. So I'm really excited about this idea of a national flood program. I wonder, could you clarify, does it include pluvial, fluvial, and coastal flooding? Anyone can answer. Or will it?
I can take this one, although I would not have a complete answer because we are in development of this program at the moment. We're still working on development of the policy, but all the elements that you just indicated, it will be taken in consideration. It just, we don't know how that will look like.
Okay, yeah, because so on the Halifax Harbor in the Bedford Basin, we have a number of homes that get flooded from the two rivers that come down from the harbor and from heavy rain. So all three are leading to really high risk of a bunch of houses that have been there for a long time. And we were trying to negotiate a buyout program when I was at the city of Halifax, where we would use the federal dollars with, cooperation of the province to be able to buy out these houses, which is an approach, because I'd say that these trends are really unaffordable over time, even with the national flood program, even with the cooperation of the insurance industry and federal backing of it's all it's all taxpayer dollars, it's all homeowner dollars. We need to be thinking, I think, a little bit more. I'm wondering if you are thinking more about prevention, especially when these things are going to happen more often in more places at worse levels. Would be really interested to know if this program is going to be looking at options for relocation for owners. Do you have any information on that right now?
I don't have that exact information at the moment. Where we have been engaging, as my colleague indicated in his speaking point, in his opening remarks, we have been engaging with PTs, with provinces and territories and industry, collecting the information to be able to provide those policy perimeters and developing the policy objective for this program. I really hear your point. The other thing that I would add, there are other programs would be available at the same time in addition of the flood insurance. For example, like Public Safety is advancing the Flood Finder, which is a portal that will actually educate the Canadian to see if they are living in the high risk area, or if their homes are being subject for flood in the future. So that will help them to take the right actions to address that. And then there is the disaster financial assistance arrangement when there is a big disaster, when there is a big flood events happening. We'll be working with the province and territory to address that. So homeowners will have access to some solution on that front.
Thank you. And are the early indications in working with the insurance sector on this program that they would be supportive of building back better, that whole kind of theory, and not just building back like for like in the same place necessarily as part of the program?
The answer would be yes. So what we heard from industry, it's creating a resilience program, build back better. It's very important for them too.
Yeah, okay, that's what we heard in some previous witness testimony also. That's great to hear. I'm also wondering, when you're thinking about the program, how are you factoring in the risk and the changing risk over time? At the City of Halifax, we spent more than $250,000 just to do updated, really detailed flood mapping using bathymetric and terrestrial LiDAR. And the whole thing took years, and we had a consultant on board for a long time just to get that data, which is kind of a snapshot in time. And then there's the whole issue of sharing the data. So like what's the thinking around providing the data for people's homes across this country, the perception that it'll decrease property values, and like how do you manage that whole conversation?
Thank you for the question. And on that, I would say the answer would have two front sides. As I indicated, we are actually, Public Safety is developing the Flood Finder portal where Canadian, they will see if they are if their homes are located in a high risk area, and what are the tools would be available for them to address that. I think that is on one hand. On the other hand, I would say we will be working on a comm strategy, and we'll be working with partners, like working with provinces and territories will be very important on addressing that, because they have also their own, in some jurisdiction, they have their own mapping, and we need to make sure that they are complementary information.
Insurers have their own mapping also, a whole different set. Yes.
Indeed. Yeah.
And when do you think the portal will be finished and live?
I don't have the exact timing, but it will be very soon. I would say it's in the near future. So we are just doing we're finalizing some work, but I don't have the exact timeline, but we are doing our best to make it available for all Canadians.
And what's the kind of level of detail of the information that will be in the flood portal? Is it at the homeowner site level, or is it more? Is it a different scale than that?
It will be at the homeowner. Like as a citizen, okay. I can enter my home address, and then I will see all the information related to that. So it's really at the homeowner.
I think my time is up. Thank you.
Monsieur Bonnet, la parole est à vous. 6 minutes.
Mr. Bonnet, you have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Pour les gens peut-être de sécurité publique, protection civile.
Perhaps for public safety and emergency preparedness, I'm I'd like to welcome you, but since the year 2000, I have had the opportunity to obtain some training in crisis management. It was very interesting. So I'd like to hear you speak about the current evolution. That is, you're trying to move ahead with the approach to emergency measurement, the fact that you require a more proactive approach. What exactly do you mean by that? Thank you for the question. The emergency measures system, no, I'm sorry, I'll use the English word. It's the status quo. But I think it is time for Canada to adopt a different approach and to modernize this emergency measures approach. We do have programs in place in order to prevent and to address the situation. We want to make sure that we can be proactive and not always be in a reactive mode. The idea is to prepare ahead of time to ensure that we have the capacities in place that enable us to meet with a specific situation. The idea is really to prepare ahead of time and not simply always respond to a situation once it arises. So unless I'm mistaken, the last update of the National Disaster Mitigation Strategy of Canada is from 2022. Is that correct? And when do you think that you will have a new strategy? Yes, you're absolutely right. And it should be renewed. Since November, we've launched the process that is to renew this disaster mitigation strategy. The idea is to work with provinces and territories and with the entire federal government and with external partners. The process has already been launched and we intend to complete it by the fall. So you mentioned the National Flooding Insurance Program that is moving forward. Could you remind us exactly when you began to build this National Flood Insurance Program? And could you tell us by what time we could expect to see that program? Thank you very much for that question. The program was started some 2-3 years ago. Well, I began, that is when I joined public safety in 2023, and at that time we were working on some commitments had been made in the past. So now that the actual conversation on the topic started more than 3 years back, but I would say that the actual work began over the last 3-4 years. This was under the former government, so the current government have put this into their platform as being a high priority file. We're currently working on it to move forward. However, it is a complicated file. It'll be very difficult for me to give you an exact dates, but I can tell you that it is one of our priorities. And by the fall, in 5 to 10 years, I hope not. I'll be retired by then, so I certainly do want to be there to see it. But if you push, what would you say? Well, I can speak to the general process as a whole, but I couldn't state exactly what we can see as an exact date to complete the program. But we are moving forward. And I know there's a political side to this. But to develop the strategy, how much time do you estimate that you require for it to be available to Canadians in the actual market? That's quite a process. No date. It's very difficult for me to give you a date. Perhaps we can come back to it. So how much money is available for emergency disaster management in Canada? Let's say within 5 years, would you have a forecast for how much you might need?
No, I don't. I can get that to the chair.
Well, we can provide you with a written answer on that because there are a number of programs available. I just want to make sure that we're delivering the right information to you so we can send you a detailed answer in writing. And are you looking at various risk scenarios? Given climate change, are we looking at global warming of 2.5 degrees, and what would this mean for Canada? Would it be less? Would it be more? Have you looked at those kinds of scenarios? We have a team made up of scientists and engineers who are working on modeling. They build on assumptions and they develop scenarios, but we don't have the exact details. But yes, I think we all recognize that climate change is a very key component of what we're seeing today in Canada. So if I were to say to properly manage emergency preparedness within 5 years to be ready, you don't have forecasts of how much money you need in order to proper manage emergencies. I'll be frank with you, it will be very difficult to establish. Because yes, we could conduct simulation on climate change, but just imagine if there were an earthquake. Well, we're speaking about global warming and its impacts, and that has been modeled. It's not perfect, but could you give us a rough estimate? We have a sense based on the past few years. If you were to look at the wildfires, we can use 2023, 2025, and on the basis of that with science, we can conduct a calculation. If you would like to obtain that information, if you would like to have that data as to how much this will cost, we can prepare a complete answer for that when it comes to flooding and wildfires as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. DeFazio, in a previous life, I was a councillor for a small First Nations band, and I was a chief councillor as well. And housing was one of the top topics annually on a daily basis for a variety of reasons. But in terms of looking at the data, you're talking about the amount of issues that you're looking at, including First Nation communities. And what we're talking about here is a variety of topics, including insurance and protecting from climate change events. Are there numbers in terms of on-reserve housing that kind of reflect the insurance issues that First Nation band councils or leaderships have on reserve?
I wouldn't have any of that information, sir.
Ms. L. Bied, would you be aware of any numbers of on-reserve insurance premiums or coverage, whether it's covered? See, what I'm getting at is it's a complicated issue on reserve. A band council is basically in charge of and responsible for all housing, whether it be through CMHC or Indian Affairs. And it's very vague and confusing whether or not it's up to the band council to cover off the insurance or whether it's up to the individual. I don't want to say homeowner because it's a complicated issue. But are there numbers in terms of insurance coverage for those living on reserve, insurance-wise?
Thank you for the question. Although I don't have the answer, but we can work with Indigenous Services Canada and try, we can get you the answer. But if you're asking me the question as the lead for this fight within public safety, we don't have that information available.
Okay. And why I ask is because probably every reserve across Canada faces the same situation. It's a matter of the relationship with the government versus the relationship with whoever is occupying the house at the time. And it's transitioning. There's a number of bands that are actually signing agreements with banks that allow mortgages to be approved on reserve, but you can't own the land base. So I suspect that somehow the bank is putting into place some type of agreement that talks about insurance coverage. Are any of the panelists witnesses aware of this arrangement? No, that's okay. That's fine. I know it's a lot of people aren't aware of these issues facing First Nations on reserve. Ms. Bied, you talked briefly about the flooding in the Fraser Valley. Is there any conversation in terms of what will be happening internationally in terms of the flooding issues happening in Fraser Valley, specifically Abbotsford? Because we do know the history of that area. We do know the drainage. We do know about that. But we haven't heard too much in terms of how this would get resolved with our neighbors south of the border.
Thank you for the question. And yes, I know I mentioned that like briefly in my opening remarks. This is something that we are taking it in account in building this new program and policy for flood insurance. How that would work, I would say we're still at the early stage of developing this policy. But I hear your point. It's very important.
In terms of the relationship or the negotiations with the Americans?
We're not there yet on that front. Like
Okay.
for the flood insurance, I'm speaking about my program.
Okay. And Ms. Elbied or Ms. DeFazio, one of the topics we're talking about here is basically related to houses that are built in high-risk zones and how really that there's encouragement from insurance companies not to rebuild in a high-risk zone. So when we're talking about building back better, either of you from your departments, is there some type of policy or some type of encouragement to tell communities or homeowners saying, you are in a high-risk flood zone, you should perhaps consider not rebuilding there?
Yeah. Thank you for your question and comments. So you may know at the moment Public Safety has the Disaster Financial Assistance Program arrangement. That is the main program where people have been impacted by wildfire or flood are receiving help when the province and the territory reach out to their threshold and they put a request to the federal government to seek funding through that. So homeowners and those families are receiving funding through that program. Once the flood insurance program, this program first has been modernized, so last year, and has been...
Ms. Bied, I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm time limited here. The question was, is there a policy to encourage people that have suffered under these circumstances, are they encouraged not to rebuild in the same zone that's risk-prone?
They are, in a sense, and let me just unpack that a bit. At the moment, the DFAA, the new DFAA, address that by having the flood insurance program. Once that is available, the homeowners will be responsible to take actions. So yes, the new DFAA would address that. They would.
Okay, thank you.
La parole est à vous pour 5 minutes.
Thank you all for being here today. Mr. DeFazio, there's currently a private member's bill before this committee called C-241, an act to establish a strategy respecting flood and drought forecasting. I don't assume that you know about it, but the private member's bill is an idea about developing forecasting to provide stakeholders with better information to forecast floods. So my question to you, Mr. DeFazio, would such forecasting for better modeling to identify which properties are most at risk or which infrastructure is most at risk, would that be useful for Canadians and would that be useful for CMHC?
So yes, in terms of running a reinsurance program, having as much information and latest and accurate information would help. I think consumers having that information too would be helpful. So the answer is yes.
Great, thank you. One of the reasons I ask is because one of a portion of my writing is Anjou in Montreal, and last summer we experienced some pretty severe flooding. It impacted a lot of basements, and a lot of those homeowners are unable to rent out those units, which exacerbates the housing crisis that we're facing. So maybe a quick question, would this benefit the residents in my writing of Honoré Mercier?
I couldn't really tell, sir, if it would.
Okay. Mr. DeFazio, your climate change office, I believe, has existed since 2020, I believe, to realize the important work of climate on housing. I'm curious how we balance the needs for climate resilience, not just for homeowners, but also renters. Can you speak to the role, the importance of a lot of the adaptation for buildings for renters instead of homeowners? Is that part of your work? Do you look at this situation for renters?
So as part of my day-to-day functions, sir, no, I don't have rental programs in, but I am confident in speaking about the underwriting philosophy that we do have when it comes looking to put up either through lending operations or through our mortgage loan insurance operations to take into consideration mitigation, to take into consideration having climate compatibleness be available to renters, which we see as being the most vulnerable and low-income Canadians, so as not to keep them out of the market from the benefit of having better mitigation to buildings that will last longer, that they will have homes to go to because they will be the least likely to recover from a flood. For instance, if the building they can't inhabit it, elevators are flooded, what are they going to do? They have to rely on income, other sources. Yes.
Maybe one last question for you, Mr. DeFazio. Our government has a Build Canada Homes program. We're aiming to build a lot more new buildings. Maybe a general question, as we're building out new homes, how do we build out those homes to become more resilient to floods or fires?
Again, that's not my area of expertise, but there are plenty of organizations like the Intact Center on Climate that offer information on how to mitigate at the homeowner level. But in terms of my daily role, I'm not involved in that.
Thank you. Madame Elbied, peut-être une question en français, si vous me permettez.
If I may, I'll ask my question in French. I think that my colleague, Mr. Ross, mentioned this about Indigenous communities. Often, Indigenous communities are severely affected by housing issues, as my colleague has said. Could you perhaps speak about your agency and how we can better protect houses against flooding in Indigenous communities? Thank you very much for your question. The issue regarding Indigenous communities covers a number of points. And my recommendation of my answer to that question is that we need to work with Indigenous services to ensure that Indigenous communities have the necessary measures put in place, because this department is responsible for infrastructure, for housing, and they deliver a number of services, and they hold a responsibility for these. So I do work with them. We'll continue working on other issues as well. So I think that it would be a good idea to continue our collaboration on that aspect. And my second question is, are there any measures that house buyers can take to make sure that their houses are more resilient to natural catastrophes? Well, there is a flooding portal that will shortly be available in Canada to Canadians. We'll go to a great length to help all of Canadians. In fact, that is really an educational tool. It will be a new tool that all Canadians, regardless of who they are, should become familiar with, so to understand how important it is to use that information. 2.5 minutes. You spoke about costs. You spoke about the costs of flooding and drought, and you cited some numbers. But could you also speak about the forecast for the financial resources required for the Department of Public Safety? Could you, and again, based on the various scenarios that have been outlined with respect to disasters, let's say this global warming over 2.5 degrees, perhaps you could speak to exactly what you've tabled. I'd also like to know whether or not, well, you said that prevention really is the basis. And do you believe that reducing greenhouse gases is a preventive measure to a certain extent? To a certain extent, yes, as you said. If there were one thing one should do, would that be the priority? That is prevention. It has to prevent future risks. I don't know if that is up to public safety to make that determination. You don't have an opinion on it? I do not. That's unfortunate. Unfortunately, I cannot help you in that. Often we've spoken about the importance of actors on the ground. We've seen municipalities here and who are trying to, they are in fact the front lines in terms of emergency preparedness and disaster prevention, and then there's the province. Could you tell us what the federal government in terms of civil safety is doing, and that could not be carried out by a province, such as Quebec, for instance?
C'est une très bonne question. En fait,
That's a very good
c'est
question.
différent d'une province à une
It
autre.
really depends on the
Pour le
provinces.
Québec,
Well, for
je peux pas
Quebec,
dire que c'est ce qui arrive par exemple. Ce que
well, I
je
couldn't
vais
quite
parler
say, but
de ce que j'ai
I
vécu
can
en fait
speak
les
about
dernières
what
années,
I have seen these last
ce
few
qu'on
years
voit, ce qui arrive
and what
souvent.
we're
Ça dépend
seeing
de la
often
situation et
is that
la
it depends
largeur
on
de
the
l'événement.
situation and the extent
Donc,
of
la
the
province doit
event.
déterminer
The province
qu'ils ont arrivé
has
aux
to
ressources, qu'ils ont
determine
utilisé toutes les ressources qui
whether
sont
or not it
disponibles
has
pour
used all
adresser la
of its
situation.
available
À ce moment-là, ils
solutions to
reviennent vers le
address the
gouvernement
situation.
fédéral, puis
If they
demandent
have
une aide
exhausted their
spécifique pour
resources, they
certains
can turn to
éléments
the federal
qui sont
government. They can
spécifiques. Donc,
ask
on
for
a vu
assistance regarding specific points.
situations
We've seen a number of cases, and it's really different each time. So we're really speaking about preparedness. For example, Quebec already does very good mapping of its flood zones. Do you think that it makes more sense for a province manages its own risks and then quantifies the flooding risk and therefore controls that expertise? Or should there be a kind of overarching national structure that comes to the assistance of the province? And I'm speaking about a province like Quebec that has devoted a lot of money to this.
Vous l'aviez dit au début, c'est
You said it at the outset, it's the municipality and the province that first intervene, and the province will step in first to take the measures to prevent flooding, and if they require more measures, they turn to the federal. We're in constant communication. We have an excellent relation with all of the provinces and territory. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Bexty, your floor is yours for 5 minutes.
You said that with some exasperation. Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. It's it is a serious subject that we have here, but a little brevity kind of maybe cracks the ice a bit. I want to approach this a little bit differently, but still in the same thread. I want to look at this from the perspective of the taxpayer as the final underwriter for disaster recovery, right? And we should be driving at a model that minimizes the impact on the taxpayer as well as protects the assets and the lives and the livelihoods of the citizens and the people at large. It's part of the notion of collective defense, and how do we craft that is important. And it comes to risk and risk mitigation, but the measurement of risk is two components of severity versus frequency. And I'm not sure if you've seen yet, but there was a report out by the parliamentary budget officer, I believe, that talked about severity and frequency. And some frequencies are quite flat over time, in the flood frequency, for example. Forest fire, a little bit different, but we want to look at the methods and methodologies of digging into that. I want to understand a little bit how both you indicated, Mr. DeFazio, that frequency is increasing, but PBO says maybe not, specifically related to floods. What measures do you use to evaluate frequency of serious events?
So we would use industry data from organizations like CAT-IQ to take a look at the trends. And from what we've seen in our research, the trends show that insurance losses from catastrophic events like flooding have been on the rise over the last 10 to 15 years.
So how do you quantify, at what threshold does it become catastrophic? Is it just a dollar value, or is it a normalized measurement over time? Over time, over the last several decades, over the last century, right? The houses that we live in, for example, have become much more elaborate. We've become accustomed to a much higher lifestyle. And so how is that taken into account and normalized? Along with choices that we make to live on the banks of the river because it's a nice place to live.
I can't speak to that, sir. I can just say, just looking at the metrics from CAT-IQ, they would have a dollar amount. And then once it reaches a certain amount, they would consider it to be a catastrophic event.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's arbitrary. To the resiliency and building back better, like the resilient, and I'm not sure who best, I think this is an insurance question. Whenever there's a recovery and, insurance puts us back, is supposed to put us back in like kind of quality. And there's an effort to, put better shingles on or better siding on or build berms or something, right, to mitigate future. I'm worried about the experience where an insurance company will then say, you've improved the property now, it's worth a lot more money, we're going to increase your premiums. And I'm worried about that from firsthand experience because that happened to me. How can we address that systemically?
I don't really have a good answer for you, sir, on that in terms of the functioning of the pricing for insurance markets. I think that what you've described is taking a look at the materials that are used to rebuild the house, the value of the house, and then the insurers assess the risk and then develop the premium. I understand what you're saying, sir, but I wouldn't have an answer to be able to explain that.
Of the high-risk areas that we currently have now on the maps that exist, how long have they been high risk?
The maps, we don't have maps.
Well,
publicly.
whatever areas that we allocate or describe as high-risk areas right now, how long have they been high risk?
I have to check on that. I don't have an answer.
Forever, perhaps?
Maybe in some cases, but not
every place.
It's not by default. This is what my polite.
I appreciate that.
It's
I
not
know,
by default.
I know subsequent work and civil works exasperate the conditions a lot of time. That's why up-to-date maps and understanding are so important. But along with that, are there any plans to limit rebuilding in areas where well, we kind of talked about that, but what specific mechanisms can public safety use to encourage municipalities and developers to not do bad behavior, not develop on floodplains, have adequate setbacks on the urban interface to prevent urban interface fires? What mechanisms are you looking at employing to do that?
We need to work with PTs and make sure that their program, the DFAA on the one hand, is addressing that, the new DFAA, and then the federal government will continue to work on the flood insurance program.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Grant, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses, and thank you for the expertise that you bring here. It is, like my colleague, Mr. Ross, I also served as a band counselor for a First Nation in British Columbia. Like Mr. Ross, my nation is on the coast of British Columbia and very prone to flooding. It's at the mouth of the Fraser River. But we've seen this right across our province, British Columbia, but in more frequent and more severe matters. So, the cost of housing is probably undoubtedly going up because of trying to protect the homes that people live in. And I just wanted to know, Mr. DeFazio, if you know how much has climate change impacted the cost of housing, if any, how much it's starting to impact the cost of housing as we're building that into the future?
Unfortunately, sir, I don't have that information.
But you agree that it's impacting it so that it's becoming more expensive to build homes in British Columbia?
Generally, across Canada, it's becoming more expensive to build homes, sir.
Thank you. And you've also spoken previously about intersections between the climate crises and housing and the need to address both simultaneously. Could you highlight some of the most effective and efficient potential solutions and mitigations?
Sure. In terms of the direct work that I'm doing, the reinsurance is an element that's important. Reinsurance to be able to then allow insurers to offer insurance, I think generally will have a good effect. When you think about escalating costs for housing, there's the direct costs for housing to actually construct. There's the housing costs for financing. There's also secondary costs like insurance, and they all essentially are linked. So you could take a look at the financing costs eventually one day could take in consideration things like climate risk, which then makes the financing and the ability of the borrower to service that debt more expensive. It also has a play into resale markets and creating stability in housing markets. So there is several different links on how this all comes together. But again, back to my original function is looking at the reinsurance and that hopefully that this has a way to create some stability in insurance markets.
Thank you. Ms. Albied or Mr. Bupsing, could you tell us a little bit more about the new incentives for business and municipalities to build back better, as you told us earlier, and proactively reduce risks through the modernized disaster financial assistance arrangements program?
For sure. So one of the key elements through the new disaster financial assistance arrangement program, it has 5 streams, and one of the streams is resilience. So that is really focusing on build back better, doing things like, mitigate the key situation. And this is, again, I want just to indicate, we have the federal government have put it in place a new program. Each provinces and territories, they take our terms and conditions and they create their own programming. Those 5 streams are available for the PTs, and the stream 5 about resilience, and they know it's very important, mainly on the Build Back Better. So most of them have finalized their own new program, and they are taking that seriously, part of their terms and conditions too.
And how are post-disaster reviews conducted, and how does the program address lessons learned during previous disasters and best practices internationally?
Best practices internationally?
Yeah, do we take lessons from around the world as well? As I'm sure that many of them are experiencing disasters as well.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. There are a number of things that we do. So here at Public Safety, after every sort of major hazard season, natural disaster, we'll do what we call a lessons learned or an after-action report. We'll look at what happened across the season, and we will actually talk to stakeholders. We'll engage with them to get a sense of where we've done well, where there are issues that have propped up. Every single hazard season brings new challenges for us, whether that's in new communities or impacts that have been felt. There could be capability issues in terms of response. There are challenges after in terms of recovery. So we'll develop a report. We'll share that. Internationally, we certainly work with a lot of countries that are similar in nature. So our Australian colleagues for bushfires, as they call them over there, there's lots to learn from them. We're in close contact with other emergency management agencies around the world, whether those are European or Americans. There's lots to learn from their kind of examples, either through floods or fire seasons, et cetera. And so we will exchange information in terms of doing that. We have bilateral programs set up with a lot of international partners.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Ross.
5 minutes. Thank you. And I want to go back to the First Nations component in terms of insurance and protections from climate change events. So previously, when I started on council, we had no money. We're under the Indian Act. And it's a catch-22 where we didn't have firefighting capabilities because the Indian Act, just the way it's set up, just would not fund us. But that actually corresponded to high insurance rates or no insurance rates on reserve. We've changed that now with LNG revenues, forestry revenues, mining revenues. We fully fund our own fire station. We got state-of-the-art equipment. We got all the training. But can any of the witnesses tell me how many First Nation communities, how many reserves across Canada are still under the Indian Act that don't have adequate firefighting capabilities?
It's a good question. I would not have the answer. I would have to check with Indigenous Services Canada. We don't have that information within public safety.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody have that information? Do we have any idea of, because it does correspond to insurance rates on reserve and the complication, I get the complication of band council-driven housing versus individual housing, but it does actually coordinate with affordable insurance on reserve, if at all. And we're talking about affordable insurance here, but more often than not, nobody is aware of the pressures that band councils put under a situation that they can't resolve, just because they can't fund what is actually being asked of them. But in terms of the zoning, can you tell me how many First Nation communities are living in high-risk zones, whether you're talking about forest fires, or flooding? Anybody on the panel?
I'll just respond. No, we don't have that number. We do know that there are high-risk communities across the country, and whether that is evacuation kind of from flooding or if they're just in high-risk kind of fire kind of paths, we know that. We can look into it. Again, these are kind of important questions that public safety wouldn't have the data to, but we can certainly look into that for you.
Okay, because one of the topics is talking about insurance companies and maybe possibly a government-backed program talking about do not rebuild in a high-risk zone. We'll cover the cost to rebuild, but not there. But in First Nation communities, the history is complicated, where it might have been that was not their choice to begin with. They were probably moved there from the government for some other type of development. So if there's any way to get that kind of information in terms of how many First Nations are living in high-risk zones, because I think when we were talking about the cost to move them to a Build Better program, that can cost a lot of money when we're talking about a First Nation, not to mention the Band Council being presented with this issue. I would love a written response for any one of the panelists, if that's okay. All right. Mr. Chair, I cede the rest of my time to the next panelist.
Thank you very much. You're very kind, Mr. Fanjo.
Thank you.
And that means will attribute a minute to Mr. Bonnet right afterwards.
Okay.
Mr. Fanjo, 2 minutes. Mr. Bonnet, 1 minute après.
Thank you. Mr. DeFazio, in your testimony, you talked about climate-compatible homes. Could you elaborate on what makes a climate-compatible home in 2025?
Sure. In terms of, I'll speak to the criteria that we largely rely on for underwriting. Largely would be energy efficiency. So the type of materials, the type of equipment that's within the house to help reduce the carbon footprint. So we would do evaluations on that, score it, and then through our programs either prioritize those programs higher or they'd be eligible for premium discounts.
Okay, thank you. And are there any levers in CMHC that would allow you to assess different risk categories to homes that you're insuring in order to create an incentive for builders and buyers to take advantage of options that they have?
The lever would be done, sir, at the front end on the underwriting criteria to work with the proponent to say, if you do these things and you put these technologies into your building, here's the benefits that we can give you. And largely the benefits would be around a longer amortization period to help manage monthly cash flows. And then also too, in terms of premium discounts for mortgage loan insurance, overall helping to make the transaction more affordable.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Albied, with the climate getting warmer, the planet getting warmer, we know that the effect on extreme weather events escalates exponentially. This was a good question. Okay, thank you.
Monsieur Bonnet, la parole est à vous pour 1 minute. Merci.
Mr. Bonnet, you have the floor for 1 minute. So the loans program for Greener House was put in place, I believe, but do you think that in the new Building Back Canada strategy that should come back? I do not have an answer. Once again, unfortunately. The flood insurance program, do you believe that it's urgent to put this in place? It's important, yes. It has to be done. Canada must adopt this approach to move forward. The RCMP sometimes is called to step in, to intervene, and sometimes even the military. Do you think that they should obtain training that is at the RCMP and military level, where there's a greater focus on intervene in case of a disaster? Well, the military intervenes when the federal government has reached its maximum capacity. Should they obtain training, that should be increased. Well, as you know, I don't know if there was commitment to a consultation that was started in November until February 28th to meet questions about how the emergency measures system should work.
I would like to thank the witnesses for their testimony here today. You are now excused, and I shall suspend the meeting for a few minutes while we change witness panels. Thank you again.